Hello! Welcome to this How Do I video on managing users using Management Portal Web Services API. This video is a part of the Microsoft Dynamics NAV Managed Service for Partners. In this video, you'll get to know the User Management API and how it maps to user actions in the Management Portal. We'll do this in 3 steps. I'll introduce the user management functionality and explain what API calls are available. At this point, I'll explain the difference and importance of both the Management Portal API and NAV Tenant API. The following 2 steps will show how this API can be utilized from PowerShell and .NET environments, and how it's easy to create either visual user interface for managing users, as well as scripting commandlets to simplify user management automation. Let's get started. The best way to introduce the User Management API is to show its Management Portal user interface. Users belong to tenants. This means that to manage users, you have to do that from the tenant card page. The actions in this page, as well as on the Application Tenant User card page, are all part of the Application Tenant User SOAP service. The tenant users are listed in the Users subpage. I can create users manually from here. Creating a user corresponds to the create method of the SOAP API. It's important to understand user statuses. A new user is always in the status draft. To gain access to NAV, a user has to be provisioned. To provision the user, click the Provision action. This corresponds to the new method in the API. When a new user account is provisioned, the managed service assigns a random temporary password that the user has to change at the first sign-in. You can also set passwords manually. Manually signed passwords do not require changing. Setting passwords is done with the setPassword method of the SOAP API. Administrator users are provisioned with a super permission set. Other users are provisioned without any permission sets. It is not possible to assign permission sets from the Management Portal UI. Also, there is no method in the Management Portal SOAP API that makes this possible. You can assign permission sets from Tenant NAV User Interface, for example the web client, or Tenant Web Services. To do this, you'll have to publish the user card page as a SOAP web service. The only exception here is that the Make Administrator action will assign the super permission set to the user. In the SOAP API, this is done through the Make Administrator method. Provisioned users can be enabled and disabled. Both actions are done through the setEnabled method in the SOAP API. Users can be deleted. However, this is a tricky part. Once provisioned, users should not be deleted. They should only be enabled or disabled. Users that have signed into NAV at least once cannot be deleted at all. You can only delete users in draft or provisioning failed status, or users in disabled status if they never signed in. You can delete such users from the Management Portal UI and also from the SOAP API by calling the delete method. If a user is enabled and has never signed in, then you must first disable it and then delete it. Or you can call the remove method of the SOAP API. To keep it simple, just follow this rule: never delete, only disable. Last action on users is the set contact email. It will set the contact email address, most importantly for the purpose of receiving a new password. In SOAP, it's the set contact email method. Let's now take a look at how to use this API from PowerShell. Here, I have created a managed service module that exposes Management Portal API as a set of PowerShell commandlets that allows pipeline support for tenants, companies, and users. Here's the Application Tenant User section, which has commandlets to manage users. Let's test it out. I'll set the managed service scope to specify to my PowerShell session in which managed service partner tenant I'm executing my work. All of my managed service commandlets use my custom get web service proxy commandlet that connects to the SOAP service requested and creates the .NET proxy assembly to provide object model for a SOAP service. Once a service is created, the proxy classes are cached, and on subsequent calls, they are returned from the cache. This is important to avoid .NET typing conflicts that could easily arise if you create the same proxy twice with the same namespace. Now that you have seen what the get web service proxy commandlet does, it is simpler to follow what individual managed service commandlets do. Let me start with the get application tenant user commandlet. It retrieves the proxy and it calls read multiple on it. I call it like this. Since I provided no other input, it shows all users from all tenants. I can filter it, for example, by username. Or I can use the getTenant commandlet and then pipe it into my getApplicationTenantUser commandlet like this. This commandlet returns the retrieved user objects to the pipeline, and I can use them to process them further. For example, I can disable all non-administrative users in a tenant at once. This is the disable commandlet. Again, very simple, but very much PowerShell. It receives the users from the pipeline and for each user calls the setEnabledSoap method and then reads the updated application tenant user and writes it to the pipeline. Let's see another one, createApplicationTenantUser. It creates a new instance of the application tenant user object, sets its properties and then calls the createSoap method and finally writes the created user to the pipeline. I can call it to create a new user like this. It creates a new user on the specified tenant. However, since this commandlet also receives pipeline input on the tenant, I can use it to create a test user on all of my tenants, like this. Again, since all of this works on pipeline down to the deepest level, I can create a user on all tenants and then provision them and then set a specific password and then disable them all in one go. These commandlets take care of application tenant users, but we also need to handle permission sets. As you know already, there is no management portal API for this, and you have to call into each tenant's NAV SOAP web services. So I have the NAV user section where I handle NAV users and their permissions. First, the getNAVUser commandlet. It receives application tenant users or array of strings from the pipeline and returns the NAV user. I can pipe this information into the setNAVUserPermissionSets commandlet, which receives users on the pipeline and sets their permission sets. Let's understand how it does so. First, it receives an array of permission sets from the parameter. Then, for each one of those, it instantiates an instance of the tenant.user.userLine object. This comes from the user page web service, where the user line subpage lists user permission sets. Then it assigns the permission set and the company, and after the for each loop completes, it assigns the array to the permissions property of the user object. Then it simply calls the update method on the user page web service and writes the updated user to the pipeline. Again, since everything works on a pipeline, I could get all my application tenant users for all tenants, then get their corresponding NAV users, then on each of those set permissions to include basic and foundation permission sets. Nice and simple, isn't it? Once you have a module such as this, automating the management of your managed service tenants is very simple. However, your users and prospects will not have PowerShell access to their NAV instance, so you may want to provide nice management user interface for them using .NET. Here, I'll use the MVC website example I presented in the How Do I video on creating a trial experience using Management Portal API, and I'll build on top of it. I'll explain a couple of changes I made to this website. First, it has an additional controller called Users. On that controller, I have two views. The index view to read all application tenant users using the application tenant user SOAP web service, and the new view that allows me to create a new application tenant user. Then I'll have a new provisioner class that calls into the web services you have seen in the PowerShell part and automates creation of the user account, provisioning it, and then assigning permission sets you specified. Let's take a look at the end result here. Here, in scope of one tenant, I have the following users, and for each of them I can check the permission sets, which I can even filter by company name. If I want to create a new user, I click New, and then in the New view I populate the user account fields, choose the company to which the user will have access, and click the permission sets I want to assign to the new user. When I click Create, I get redirected to the same provisioning status page I have for tenant provisioning, only this time it simply shows the user provisioning status, and when it completes, I can verify that the user is created with correct permission sets in my customer portal, but also in my NAV instance. Let's wrap up. In this video, you have seen how the Management Portal user interface actions map to the SOAP API that you can easily call from both PowerShell and .NET applications. You have seen how with little effort you can have nice PowerShell library of commandlets with full pipeline support, and how you can have custom user management portals built in C#. The topics covered in this video include how to consume the SOAP web services from PowerShell, with most important point being that SOAP web service proxies should be cached both for performance and structural integrity of your code. Also, you have seen how to easily implement pipeline support in custom PowerShell commandlets to automate administrative tasks that can be executed in bulk. And finally, you have seen how to use asynchronous SOAP calls from .NET and how to embed such web service calls into nice and simple user interfaces. To learn more about the Microsoft Dynamics Managed Service for Partners, please visit http://aka.ms/NAV Managed Service. Also, all sample code I demonstrated here is available for you on GitHub. It is provided as is, with no warranties or support, and you use it entirely at your own responsibility. I hope you enjoyed this How Do I video. Thanks for watching, and come back for more videos in the Microsoft Dynamics NAV Managed Service for Partners series.